In episode 8, the homeless encampment is continued to grow. Now it's not just homeless teens, it's adults that are also obsessed with Leanne. And every morning she goes out to address her followers. When she comes back in, Dorothy, however, is very cold with her. Leanne will try to help out, but Dorothy's having no parts of it. She's also not letting Leanne get anywhere near Jericho. Because of that, Dorothy looks extremely run down. It's as if this poor woman has to raise her own child by herself. Thoughts and prayers. Dorothy's also being extremely cold to Sean. She's not even letting him sleep in the same bed. She feels like Sean was complicit in keeping Leanne in the house. So right now, it's Dorothy versus the world. Even when she is offered assignments at work, she has to turn them down because she, quote, doesn't have childcare at the moment. Leanne tries to offer to help, but Dorothy snaps at her and says, "Let me make this as clear as a bell. You will never touch Jericho again." With nothing else to do, Leanne just goes to the park. As she's sitting on a bench, Isabel runs by and recognizes her. Leanne was in the middle of crying about the whole situation with Dorothy, so she doesn't really want to be seen, but Isabel recognizes that face and sits down and has a conversation with her. She tells her that she's had that same face dealing with Dorothy. Isabel doesn't really bash Dorothy, though. She just goes on to explain how Dorothy's a perfectionist. It's really tough to live up to those standards. The conversation makes Leanne feel a lot better, so when Isabel says, "Hey, Wednesday, do you want to grab a cup of coffee?" Leanne says, "Yeah, okay." When Leanne comes home, Sean is hanging a painting with Julian. It's his latest effort to try to get back in Dorothy's good graces. He's doing everything he can think of, including fixing random stuff around the house. But Julian wants to have a conversation with Leanne, privately. He doesn't even get started, though. Leanne comes over with milk and says, "Pour me a glass." And Julian does it. But when the milk reaches the top, Leanne instructs him to keep going, which pours milk all over the counter and the floor. At that moment, Dorothy walks in, sees what's going on, and just has that reaction like, "You gotta be kidding me," and then walks off. After this weird behavior, Julian says, "I'm gonna go now." And Leanne tells him, "If that's what you really want." Upstairs, Sean starts showing Dorothy all the things that he did around the house, but Dorothy sees right through it. She knows it's Sean's way to try to get back in their bed. And doing work around the house isn't enough. Sean knows that in order to get back in their bed, he's going to have to kick Leanne out of the house. It once again starts a fight between both of them about why Leanne is still in the house, with Dorothy wanting her out and Sean saying she brought the family back together. It's difficult for Sean because Dorothy doesn't remember what happened to Jericho, the first Jericho. So in her mind, she thinks the family was fine before Leanne showed up, but they weren't. Sean needs somebody to talk to, so that night he goes and talks to Leanne. He explains that before he met Dorothy, he never really felt alone, even though he was. But when she entered his life, he needed her. And now that he doesn't have her, he feels more alone than ever. All he wants is to sit down, have a meal with her, and hold Jericho. That's it. In that moment, Leanne simply listening is all Sean needs. The next morning when Dorothy gets up, she's surprised because Sean is still in the house. They've pushed Gourmet Gauntlet a couple hours, so it gives him time to prepare a special meal. Since they missed the premiere of the episode, he figures he can have a small party with the family, and they can watch the second episode together. Dorothy immediately says, "Well, I'll call my dad and Courtney with a K." And that's not exactly what Sean was talking about. He really just wanted it to be very intimate, aka like him, Dorothy, Jericho. It's really it. Maybe Julian. But he has to make a concession to keep Dorothy happy. A couple hours later, after Sean leaves, Leanne is upstairs when she hears a siren, and she goes outside to see what's going on and sees an ambulance that's tending to what looks like a homeless guy on the ground. The homeless guy is awake and responsive, but then she sees Isabel talking to one of the EMTs and then handing him some cash. She then walks up to Leanne, not realizing that Leanne saw her interaction with the EMT, and she tells Leanne that she saw the homeless guy on the sidewalk and he wouldn't wake up, so she's the one who called the ambulance. EMTs say the guy was just dehydrated and he should be fine. Leanne doesn't ask any more questions, just saying, "No, you did the right thing." But she is absolutely suspicious of Isabel. Leanne then invites Isabel in because Dorothy's not there. She's been spending a lot of the time out of the house. Isabel brought some donuts, Leanne puts on some coffee, and the two women chat it up. Isabel is blown away by the fact that Dorothy keeps all of her tapes from every story she's done. But there's one story that catches Isabel's eye. She tells Leanne that it was a story that she actually brought to the table. She got a tip about a mobster getting taken down by the government. She even interviewed the guy in a false story a couple days before. Isabel put the whole thing together, but when she showed it to Dorothy, Dorothy said that Isabel didn't have the clout to sell it. The bosses wouldn't take her seriously, so Dorothy elected to do it for her. In the end, Dorothy got all the credit. Isabel tries to play it off like she's not upset about that because, at the end of the day, the story got to air, but she's clearly not happy about it. Isabel then starts asking about Dorothy because she hasn't been at work and they're, quote, concerned about her. She asks if Jericho's okay because they were worried that something happened to him with the whole ambulance thing last year, and that catches Leanne so off guard that she spills her coffee all over herself. When Leanne takes off her sweater, Isabel sees that there's a giant scar on her arm, and she's concerned that Dorothy was the one who did it. Isabel says to her, "I'm not going to push, but if you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here." She then leaves, and Leanne just continues to go about her day. When Sean returns home, he goes downstairs to look for a bottle of wine to pair with the food he's going to make. He finds the perfect one, but he notices that there's sawdust all over the ground. He tries to look inside the wine rack, but he doesn't see anything. Doesn't mean it's not there, though. There's termites infesting that whole thing. Sean just heads upstairs, having no idea about the termites, and continues to try to make the meal. Later that night, Leanne goes and talks to her loyal followers. She holds some kind of prayer service, vigil thing, but at the end of it, she asks two of them what happened today. And they tell her that they have no idea why the ambulance showed up because the guy seemed okay. When they got there, nothing seemed to be wrong with this guy. Leanne then asks, "Did you happen to hear what the blonde lady said to the EMT?" And they didn't, but they do tell Leanne it seems serious. They then hand her the dagger, the same dagger they're supposed to use to kill her, and she gives a speech about how the dagger is what the Church of the Lesser Saints uses to control them. They use it out of fear, but she's not afraid anymore. And then she pricks her finger. She hands the dagger around, and everybody starts pricking their finger, which is unsanitary and, quite frankly, very dangerous. When Leanne returns, she still has the dagger in her hand. And when she opens the back door, Dorothy is in the kitchen watching Gourmet Gauntlet, still trying to figure out how the hell she forgot all of that. It forces Leanne to hide the dagger behind her back. She then heads upstairs and puts the dagger back in the box. The next day, as Dorothy is home, she gets a knock at the door, and she's very surprised because it's Isabel. And we find out exactly what Isabel was talking to that EMT about. The EMT filled Isabel in on exactly what happened the previous summer with Jericho. And now Isabel can get her payback. She tells Dorothy, "I'm going to ruin your career. I know what you did. I don't know how you're not in jail, but you're not going to get away with this." As they're having this conversation, Leanne in the background walks by and sees that they're talking, sees that it's hostile. As Dorothy asks Isabel if she's been talking to Leanne and Leanne doesn't know the full story, Leanne knocks over some pots and pans, which forces Dorothy to walk away from Isabel. The distraction in the kitchen frees up Leanne to have her own conversation with Isabel. She confronts her about if she talks to the EMTs about what happened with Dorothy, and Isabel says, "Yeah, I did. I'm sorry I lied to you, but it was a part of my investigation." She asks Leanne, "Is that your baby? Did Dorothy take that from you?" But Leanne's more hurt about the fact that she feels like Isabel didn't want to actually be friends with her. Isabel starts warning Leanne about how dangerous Dorothy is, and Leanne asks, "Well, what are you going to do?" And Isabel says, "I'm going to expose her. That woman should be in jail." Isabel gets called away for work, and when Leanne comes back inside, she gets confronted by Dorothy. She feels like this is a part of Leanne's petty revenge, but Leanne tells her, "I don't hold a grudge against you." She then heads up to her room and waits for that night's dinner. And slowly the family does arrive. First it's Julian, then it's their dad with Courtney with a K. Dorothy's dad pulls her in the room and asks, "Why the hell is this girl still here?" And when Dorothy explains how she tried, her dad cuts in and says, "That's the problem with you. You've always been too soft. It's held you back." Dorothy tells her dad that she's come up with a new plan. She realizes that Leanne should be sent away. We're talking institutionalized here. She asks her dad for help with this, but they get interrupted when Leanne comes in and offers them an hors d'oeuvre. The family then heads into the living room and gets ready to watch the second episode of Gourmet Gauntlet. But right as it's about to start, Dorothy gets a text message letting her know that Isabel is currently doing a story that she asked her bosses to give to somebody else. She demands that they change over Gourmet Gauntlet to the news, and Isabel is doing a breaking news piece on a shootout in Chester. Dorothy starts saying how this should be her. She should be the one doing the story. And Leanne says, "No, Isabel should be there, Dorothy." And then all of a sudden, on live TV, you hear someone shoot a gun, and Isabel drops dead, having been shot in the head. The entire living room is in complete shock. Everybody except Leanne. Her dad says, "Thank God you weren't there, Dorothy." But the only thing Dorothy can do is look over at Leanne, who has this sly smirk on her face. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. Once again, thank you for checking out this recap.